Archie and Friends 33. Sabrina's told she's not allowed to go to a bonfire with some of her friends tonight, even though she's an omnipotent witch who can defend herself and put out fires. Salem says that the last time they attended a bonfire, they were in the middle of it tied to a stake, and they must have teleported away from it just by moving their hand a little to point. Or Ambrose saved them. They must have been brought to that point when they were asleep. Why did Sabrina even ask them permission? She's a teenager, not a child. She could have gone anyways. And the only way she wouldn't get away with warping to it anyways is if her aunts were spiteful enough to go check on her to see if she's still home. So it's a very good thing the story is only one page. Archie's Pal Jughead 90s 113. It's a lot easier to find in Betty and Veronica Double Digest 279. Zelda refuses to let Sabrina stay out a little later tonight. This would only be sympathetic if she explained that Sabrina already stays up too late to be healthy. The writer makes her look bad because Zelda refuses to explain herself, which just treats her like a child. Why did Sabrina even bother asking her for permission? She can teleport anywhere she wants after going home and going to her room. Salem says to let him settle this. And then he's seen wearing a suit and magically made his own talk show, which I assume isn't broadcast to anyone. Just for fun. And Hilda says he's been watching too many talk shows. It's amusing that he says, "I'm here with the Spellman family to discuss if Sabrina should be allowed to stay out later." At least he's encouraging them to explain why she's not allowed to. Her aunts were nothing but lenient in the past. The worst they ever did was nag her. But these stories are the start of her aunts being more strict. Betty 70. Hilda says that her house is falling apart, and we see cracks in the walls. Sabrina suggests home improvement, and she shows up at her house later on. And her aunts were dumb enough to turn her house into a castle, even though they'd realized that they wouldn't be able to get away with that. Mortals would question it. Thanks to their neighbor Morton, they couldn't even get away with keeping a new wing on their house. So it would make more sense if they revealed that they only did this as a prank to briefly freak out Sabrina. Why was Sabrina's "oh no" drawn as right above someone besides her? That only makes sense if that girl was a close friend of hers who already knew she was a witch. So this is her only reaction to the castle. Betty and Veronica 132. Salem thinks it's funny that Hilda and Zelda are going to go on a diet because they won't be able to lose an ounce. Logically, they'd just zap away their excess weight. Hilda says she can get rid of 15 pounds just like that. Salem says, "That I'd like to see." And Hilda zaps some weight to the garbage because that's how much she weighs, apparently. She knew him well enough to know that. So he says, "Bad enough they're witches, they're comedians too." I kinda like that joke. Even if she was mean to him, he was mean first. Veronica 84. Sabrina cries while telling Harvey that old movies are wonderful. Harvey says he prefers color movies. Wait, how did the artist get away with making the movie on the TV in color then? Doesn't the artist have to draw what's in the script? That was supposed to be the excuse for why Orbot was drawn to have an explosion around him in the Sonic Boom comic when he was fine later. Apparently here, the artist and script writer weren't collaborating. Anyway, Sabrina says black and white movies have a certain style and romance, and she longs for those days. So she uses magic to make the world black and white and give Harvey some new clothes. And then she expects him to just kiss her instead of being freaked out over the sudden changes and how confusing it makes her that she's casual about them. It wouldn't be so confusing if part of her spell was that he wouldn't question it. Archie 481. Sabrina and Zelda sigh sadly at Hilda bringing them a tray with food on it when they're at totally not McDonald's. They're disappointed because Hilda didn't spend the money to get the jumbo size and she's called a cheapskate. She uses magic to make the food conspicuously big, which would confuse the people working at the restaurant and make them want to punish them for supposedly bringing in outside food. Someone at the restaurant has a comical reaction to it, where its wig somehow jumps off his head, as Sabrina and Zelda appreciate what she did. Both of them should have thought of telling her to use magic to make them bigger themselves, and told them to do so after they'd leave McDonald's. I assume the reason they paid for it at all instead of zapping it up is because it's the right thing to do. Though Hilda doing this instead of paying an extra 50 cents was still cheating the restaurant out of money either way. So they're not that nice. But it's nice escapist fantasy that they get away with this. I giggled at seeing Hilda eat a giant fry and just casually say that it needs more salt. Betty 71. Amy greets Sabrina and Gina acting friendly when she doesn't have to. And for no reason, Sabrina puts in the effort of saying she has a nice dress. Amy unnecessarily brags that she got it for half off, and it was still more than Sabrina could ever afford. Doesn't Sabrina live in a really nice house though? So Sabrina uses magic to get back at her by making the dress only intact from the front, while on the back, it's showing a grey underdress like it's a jacket. But it still looks great. If anything, it could set a new fashion trend or something, depending on how much influence Amy has. She says that she sees why that dress was half off, but she could have been a lot more humiliating. Well, it's good that she didn't go too far, because Amy could have been a lot worse. In fact, she still looks good in it, so I'm glad the story ends there. Betty and Veronica, 133. Salem demands human food and gets told that Hilda's cooking the mortal way tonight, so he decides to eat cat food instead because she's bad at it. Logically, Hilda would have just zapped the cooking to perfection anyways because it obviously looks bad. Not to mention she's had hundreds of years to learn how to get great at cooking, so I don't see why she'd still suck at it. Veronica 85. Sabrina and Hilda see some normal looking women offering to buy a vacuum at a flying vacuum showroom. It's the latest in flying vacuum technology because it can be used to clean too. I don't blame Sabrina for having that reaction. You'd expect all of the flying vacuums to be able to clean. You'd think they'd all start as vacuums, and all it would take is a spell to let it hover wherever the flyer wants. And it'd otherwise be a normal vacuum. But apparently a lot of flying vacuums just have potion ingredients and no room for cleaning technology. Betty and Veronica 134. Amy asks Sabrina how she got tickets to a concert that was sold out for months. Eventually she tells her she's a witch and gets laughed off, which she expected. This makes her look clever, but only because it worked out. I like how lighthearted it is that she can get away with telling her that without the Witches' Council immediately getting mad at her, like the sitcom would do. It doesn't happen because they're smart enough to know she'd get this reaction. Archie and Friends 34. We see the most cliche panel ever where Amy says she can't allow Sabrina in her clique because it's only for the most popular girls in school. As usual, I'm wondering why any of them would actually be popular if they're that rude. How do they even find out who the most popular girls in school are? Do they have people take a vote? Do they put up a flyer in the cafeteria? Sabrina asks, so just what makes a girl popular? Amy says, oh, you know, when everyone knows your name and says hello to you. So Sabrina uses magic so that a bunch of students call out her name and say she's the best, while each one holds a letter spelling out her name. A plane flies by with some papers saying, "We love Sabrina!" And there's a billboard saying Sabrina's the best. I can't help but smile at this. Betty and Veronica 135. Zelda insists on Sabrina practicing her magic. At least she doesn't have an unsympathetic facial expression. Sabrina says she promised Harvey she'd go to the school variety show tonight, and she tries to prove she can do both by doing a magic show in front of mortals where she pulls a rabbit out of a hat. Zelda was actually nice enough to let her do this, and calls her creative. Betty 73. At first I didn't recognize Hilda because she has blonde hair instead of orange for no reason. She tells Zelda she got the new aerobics tape from the other room. Why on earth are they exercising instead of just using magic to zap away any weight they get enough of to notice? Hilda herself told Sabrina in the 90s comic that if she gains weight she can just do that. Sabrina says this is ridiculous because they only exercise one finger. Zelda says that they're witches, so as long as the zapping finger is in good shape, what else matters? Even though they know that most people would want them to be skinny, and the finger wouldn't be what people would look at. All they're gonna do is wear out their zapping finger and make it sore. The story ends with Sabrina joining them instead of nagging them or forcing them to do something else with magic, which is a nice relief. Why did they even notice if their zapping finger isn't in good shape? It's always in good shape, as long as they're not hurt or their hand isn't sore from overuse. And even then, witches could just heal it. Why did they even waste their time doing this? At least it's charming to see because it's so silly. Veronica, 87. Sabrina complains that she's out of lipstick when Harvey's at the door. Somehow, instead of her Zelda summoning real lipstick, Zelda takes the dumb risk of handing her other realm lipstick that's guaranteed to keep a guy around. How did she forget that it was literal and she'd be stuck to him? She's proud of it, which means she pulled a prank on her uncharacteristically. Then Hilda should have done this, because that would make more sense for her. Also, Harvey would hear Salem talking. It's a pretty amusing final panel. Betty and Veronica, 136. Hilda tells Sabrina that the Witches' Council asked her and Zelda to come up with a slogan for their witchcraft promotion. Why her? What's so special about her? Ambrose didn't even stay married to Enchantra. And why would they need to promote something that everyone would be using out of laziness? Sabrina says they should modify a successful ad campaign. That's smart because obviously since the mortals don't know about the Witch Realm, they can get away with ripping them off. So there's no reason not to do it. So Hilda and Zelda walk towards her wearing shirts that say, "Get Magic." And Sabrina thankfully likes it. Betty, 74. Hilda says it's nice of Sabrina to make dinner while she talks over old times with her old friends. She asks them how they liked their steaks and they screech because they're vampires. So they turn to bats and try to fly away. That was still forced. They just ate steak, so they'd know what she meant. And she could have easily not asked them that question or said dinner instead of steaks. I've already seen this in one of the non-Sabrina stories in the first issue of the 70s Sabrina comic. Betty and Veronica, Spectacular, 36. Hilda's pleasantly surprised by Cousin Fern showing up at her door. I have to assume he was teleported here because he can't walk around like that. Zelda asks how things are going since Enchantra turned him into a plant. And luckily, he's somehow still in a good enough mood to make a whole bunch of puns about the situation. And I also like that the main characters are enjoying it instead of being rude. He says that one good thing is that he doesn't have to color his hair anymore. And Sabrina says they're the only ones on the block with an actual family tree. I never thought I'd see Cousin Fern again after the story with the same name. So this was nice. Veronica, 89. Sabrina sees a fire truck outside of her house and wonders what's going on. They got a call that their cat was stuck up a tree. Salem gets rescued, and there was a cell phone up there too. So for once Salem was smart, keeping a cell phone for emergencies again. Although him being seen carrying it around would be very suspicious, because cats clearly aren't known for being able to hold a phone. He even said in the 90s comic that he's got no opposing thumbs. So if he can't open a door, how can he hold a phone? They just changed it. He just made up an excuse not to open the door, and Sabrina was too polite to argue. He'd be better off having his phone be invisible. But even then, he couldn't walk around like a cat while holding it well, because he'd have to use the phone as one of his feet. So, he climbed the tree just for fun, but brought a phone just in case. How did he climb a tree when one of his hands wasn't free? Also, since he can use magic, why wouldn't he just use magic to get out of the tree? Instead of wasting people's time. I guess he ran out of magic from overuse. Archie, 486. Salem wonders if Sabrina's aunts are running off to join the rodeo sarcastically. They're off to a dude ranch cattle roundup in the other realm, so that's more interesting than the 2000s comic when they went to a dude ranch. Sabrina warns them to be careful because they don't know anything about that. Hilda has a good reason to be confident because she's a witch. They go home already, but for no reason they don't know how to stop the cattle even though they're witches. So they could just point to stop them. They never would have knocked down the door in a stampede. I guess they're trying to stop it the mortal way. But what's the point of going to another realm rodeo if you have to do it the mortal way? Archie's pal Jughead 90s, 119. Salem tells Sabrina that her aunts would never let her leave the house in that swimsuit. Huh? It looks no more racy than any of the other swimsuits she wore. It's also confusing that the guy near her isn't freaked out that Salem's talking. Sabrina says it doesn't matter as long as they don't know. And Sabrina gets a ridiculous old-fashioned swimsuit. And Salem says that they know. I hope they're also freaked out that Salem's talking. They never did this to her, so this seems out of character. Even in the 70s style comics, her aunts didn't spy on her and do this to her. They did it in person, but they never spied on her in a crystal ball to do this to her. Betty and Veronica, 138. Salem tells Sabrina she doesn't look good in polka dots. Sabrina says, "Oh, and I suppose you do?" He says he looks good in almost everything, and she uses magic to make him have polka dots. So he looks awful. At least he admits it was his own fault. Veronica, 90. Sabrina wants to concentrate on her studying by casting a spell so that magic will force her to look at nothing but her history book. It ends with her getting smacked in the face by the book. So Salem tells her she needs to study her magic instead. Wouldn't she just be brainwashed into looking at nothing but the history book? That's what she would imagine. Archie, 487. Sabrina's mad because she wants to go to the beach, but her aunts took the car. Why did both of them take it? For no reason, Salem has to remind her that she's a witch who can just warp to the beach. And as I wonder why she doesn't always warp near the beach. She says a spell that mentions endless sands without the ocean. So she ends up warped to the Sahara Desert because she didn't think about the ocean. She could have easily not said a spell and just remembered the beach. Betty and Veronica, 139. Zelda says Sabrina should be back from practicing her flying soon. Somehow Sabrina crashes through the window while holding a vacuum. It won't go anywhere she doesn't want to go because it has to operate by going where her mind wants it to. So it won't do this. And if the vacuum was that small that she can't sit or stand on it, there'd be no reason to use it to fly instead of a broom. Sabrina's made to vacuum up the broken glass, and Zelda says this is why witches switched to vacuum cleaners. That doesn't explain it. Because a single spell could bring the glass back to the window and fix it. While she's doing this as a punishment, she could have been told to do something else. Not vacuum up the glass that's needed to fix the window without having to zap up or buy even more glass. She's gonna expend magic on fixing the window anyways. And I'm pretty sure she would have had a much easier time flying on something else. Something big enough for her to stand on. Well, it was sweet of Zelda to hold Salem and pet him. It's especially sweet because he's got the mind of a human and they still feel comfortable doing it. Betty and Veronica, Spectacular, 37. Sabrina says at the Witch Mart with Hilda that everything's flying off the shelves as a customer makes that happen. I love that. That's exactly what a witch would do when shopping. At least if they don't mind wasting their magic. Sabrina wants to check out at the 10 items store Leslie. Sabrina somehow thinks she'd be able to get away with it anyways, and has to get told that she'd get turned into a frog if she came into it with even one more item. That's overly harsh. I have to just assume that the spell's really temporary for this to be believable. Or that the transformed person could think a spell to go back to normal if he wants. I've had this page since I was younger, but I know I couldn't have owned Laugh Digest 200, or the original issue it's from. So the site doesn't list everywhere it is. Betty, 78. Sabrina doesn't want any sardine casserole Hilda's offering her. Sabrina tells Hilda to take more of these deep-fried anchovies and whispers that she wants less to eat. Sabrina offers her aunts a refill on their cod liver oil milkshake. Salem serves them a fish cake, and Sabrina says she hates it when it's Salem's turn to cook. Then why do they make him cook for them? Betty and Veronica, 140. Sabrina's tired of Amy always showing off with her car. Out of nowhere, Zelda tells her that she's not supposed to use her powers to conjure up a new car. To be fair, it wouldn't have insurance. But then she should say that to her instead of being a complete hypocrite when 90s Zelda uses magic all the time. She relaxes when Sabrina says that she just enlarged a toy car to make it a car. It still wouldn't have an official license plate on it. If all she did was that, it wouldn't be drivable because toy cars aren't made for little tiny people to drive in them. She still would have had to alter it, and at that point it wouldn't just be an enlarged toy car anymore. And you'd think she'd still be opposed to this based on her rule from earlier. Then she asks Zelda to help her put a huge battery in the car because she wants to go to the mall. I like Zelda's reaction. Veronica, 92. Sabrina walks out of the bathroom with a towel and tells Zelda she's got to grab a towel for her hair because she was too stupid to think to summon one in the bathroom. Zelda was about to tell her that the closet's malfunctioning. For no reason, she outright goes into the closet to look for towels. So she gets teleported to the Witches' Council meeting of all places. And she wishes she could have a normal closet. So the council has teleportation power of its own that can go on the fritz. I guess that's in case the witches run out of magic. But how could it start malfunctioning? I guess it's made of potion ingredients, and some of them got damaged from age. Betty, 79. Hilda hears a noise from the closet and says Ambrose must be returning from judging the Miss Other Realm beauty pageant. Sabrina assumes he must be very well respected to land that position. Zelda says he was the only one gullible enough to take it. She must be saying gullible because he got told exactly what Sabrina just said. It turns out Ambrose was turned into a frog by one of the losers, which the ants expected. I guess they tried to warn him, but he didn't believe them. Sabrina should have expected that too. She's always an idealist. Betty and Veronica, 141. Sabrina tells her aunts she'll serve their dessert and coffee by magic. Hilda says that sounds wonderful. But it's a comedy page, so I guess she'll screw up. Because she's way too likely to be either incompetent or abuse her powers in the 90s comic style comedy pages. They tell her how many lumps of sugar they want in their coffee. There's no reason she would turn her aunts into camels by accident. She would have had to imagine that for it to happen, and a camel lump looks nothing like a sugar lump. But the way the panel looks is really charming. So I guess this was funny enough for most people to be worth it. Betty, 80. Hilda tells Sabrina that her friend wants to know if she'll babysit for her son tonight. Go figure, from her name, she's one of the biggest witches in the other realm, and everyone looks up to her. Let me guess. She's actually big. The story ends with the baby sitting on Sabrina. Sabrina would have just magically shrunken into the size of a normal baby, if not kept him frozen in time for a big deal, a few measly hours. I don't see why Hilda would talk about... I guess people do look up to her, and it's just that it's literal as well. Betty and Veronica, 142. We see someone be unimpressed over a magician's magic scarf trick. I didn't recognize her at first because I can't tell how tall she is here, but it's actually Esmeralda. Her buck's teeth reminds me of Ethel here, and her black hair does too. Sabrina tells Esmeralda to behave, and she explains that magicians are boring to her, instead of all the more impressive that a mortal can figure out how to do that. He says he'll pull a rabbit out of a hat, and she gets fed up and summons a giant rabbit to pull him out of a hat. And the audience looks shocked as he screams for help, and she looks smug. I can't help but smile at that, so that was a pretty funny visual. Sabrina can erase memories. Veronica, 94. Sabrina's nice enough to be concerned that she hasn't seen Salem all day and wonder where he is. He shushes her and says he's here in the library that's apparently in her house, researching his family tree. Sure was nice of the aunts to go out of their way to find a book about Salem's family tree. I guess it makes sense because he lives with them, and maybe he asked them to do that. Sabrina jokes, if you get stuck on a high branch, let us know. And Zelda says, yeah, we'll call the fire department. And Salem's annoyed. That was amusing. Archie, 491. Sabrina tells her aunts she's having trouble getting up in the morning. And Zelda says witches have a self-alarm system. And Hilda says they can teach her how to set it. What took them so long? Sabrina agrees, and the next morning she goes to the kitchen with a bunch of talking birds bothering her. That must have been a prank. You'd think if they had a self-alarm system, it would just be, there's a spell on them that makes them wake up at the right time. Betty, 81. Sabrina cares enough to wonder where Sabrina is around Zelda, and Zelda knows him well enough to assume that he's up to his old tricks next door. She tells Salem to quit teasing the neighborhood dog, and he's holding combs and apparently doesn't want to let it have a bad hair day, even though it's a dog. And there's a ton of hair around, except on its legs. Huh? Betty and Veronica, 143. Sabrina thanks her aunts for generously letting her have the house to herself to fix up Harvey a romantic dinner. Her aunts talk as if they have a lot of trust in her and don't need to check on them. It's a comedy page, so I don't believe them. Later, Harvey thanks Sabrina, and Harvey says the eyes of her aunts' photos on the wall seem to follow him around the room. So Sabrina catches on, but at least the final panel has her holding his hands and enjoying herself anyways. Betty and Veronica, Spectacular, 39. Zelda angrily slams the phone and says her boots were supposed to have a lifetime guarantee. But now the company's out of business. Go figure they're especially old because she's a witch. It's always nice to see how older aunts are get taken advantage of. Laugh Digest 154. Sabrina and Hilda see someone looking in their trash doing an ecology survey to see what they waste. Let me guess, he'll say something weird just because they're witches. Sabrina says that witches like her get the maximum mileage out of their stuff. She uses a broom to sweep, and then flies with it in front of him, and he gets hit by the broom just for looking in their trash. That was mean. At least it was a surprise for the story to go in that direction, but it was confusing that Sabrina didn't want to hide that she's a witch and was too hot-headed.